Despite some potential for the contrary, the New Orleans Saints 2024 season will end exactly as it became early in the season, injury-riddled. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, looking ahead to this weekend's matchup, I'll tell you why Brock Bowers, Las Vegas Raiders tight end, is going to be the most important member of the Raiders on the field for the New Orleans Saints to limit if they want to get another late season win. We're going to dive into an actual kind of evaluation for Spencer Rattler. Have the New Orleans Saints gotten it yet? I'll explain why they might not think so. And we're going to start everything off here today with some injury updates and what you need to know around the biggest names and biggest stories when it comes to the New Orleans Saints and who will be available to finish out the rest of the season. We got all that and much more coming up for you on today's episode, whether it's your first time or your next time. Thank you very much for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by friends over at Game Time. Go and check out Game Time today. Create an account and use that promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. The New Orleans Saints season is set to end just as it became early on in the season, around week 3 or so, when the New Orleans Saints offensive pieces and players started to drop off due to injury. And that's exactly how this season is going to end for the New Orleans Saints, riddled with injury. Let's start off with the biggest name on the New Orleans Saints team, the biggest name on any team, the quarterback, Derek Carr, trying to make his return still this season. I believe he is absolutely motivated to get back out on the field up against the Las Vegas Raiders, who effectively and very loudly gave up on him back at the end of the 2022 NFL season. That's what led him to New Orleans in 2023. Well, it sounds like Derek Carr is not progressing the way that they would like in order to get him back out on the field this weekend against those very Las Vegas Raiders. According to interim head coach Darren Rizzi, the New Orleans Saints will turn to Spencer Rattler for his 5th start of the season if Derek Carr is not ready to go. And the way that he described it was that seems to be the situation now. So we will really know for sure, very likely later on today, when they most likely trot Spencer Rattler out there to speak to us, for his media availability and everything like that. That will be a pretty good indication that Spencer Rattler will be the starting quarterback this weekend up against the Las Vegas Raiders, which I think is a good choice by the New Orleans Saints. It's a positive matchup for the young rookie, and it should be one where they should be able to get at least a much better evaluation than they've gotten up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Denver Broncos, the Los Angeles Chargers, and last week up against the Green Bay Packers, especially with the Saints not being able to field a starting caliber team around him in either of those other 4 starts. Here's a chance for them to really kind of go up against the competition level with him at quarterback that is more eye for an eye, right? More evenly matched for the young quarterback. We'll dive into some of those specifics here in a little bit, but let's keep going here with some of these injury updates. So we mentioned the New Orleans Saints kind of week 3 is when the injuries really started to pile up for them. You remember it started with center Erik McCoy, went down with a groin injury, ended up being out for quite a while, had to have surgery on that groin, went to injured reserve, came back and then kind of re-aggravated that groin injury, then was back out there for a couple of days, couple of weeks. Well, now dealing with an elbow injury, very likely his season is over. Interim head coach Darren Rizzi said that he does not see Erik McCoy being able to get back out on the field this year, which makes sense with only 2 games to go. We expect the same with starting left guard Lucas Patrick as well. He's dealing with a knee injury that did not look great late in that 4th quarter. They did say that one, they're not sure. They don't believe that it's surgical, or at least they're seeking second opinions around it, I should say. But in any case, both Erik McCoy and Lucas Patrick expected to be out for the rest of the season. Certainly will be out this weekend up against the the Raiders. So yet another situation where you're trotting a young quarterback out there without his starting offensive line. Let's take a look at a couple of other names here on the offensive side. All these injuries over on the offense. That's just been the story for the New Orleans Saints so far this season. Again, 14 week one starters have already missed a total of 63 games. Those three players that we just mentioned, Derek Carr, Lucas Patrick, Erik McCoy, all set to miss at least, very likely 2 more games. And then running back Alvin Kamara could miss another pair of games as well. And so that would be 71 total games missed by 14 of the 22 or 23 of the team's most impactful week 1 contributors. That's the story of the New Orleans Saints health situation so far this season. And it looks like it's going to continue down that road. Running back Alvin Kamara, still fighting, still ready to get back out on the field, trying to get back out on the field. Again, just 50 rushing yards short of his first career 1,000-yard rushing season. He'd love to get that. Interim head coach Darren Rizzi would love to see him get that. The New Orleans Saints would certainly love to see him get that. The Saints had to go to a bit of a running back by committee approach last week up against the Green Bay Packers. It did not go well. They were not able to rely on Kendre Miller in his second year as the lead guy, showing that there's still some learning curve there for him in terms of understanding the offense, the nuances, all those other little things. So the Saints would love to have Alvin Kamara back out on the field, but is he going to be able to get there? He could still make it back. He's probably the one that I would say is the most likely between him and Derek Carr of getting back out on the field, but that doesn't mean that he will get back out on the field, but you'd certainly love to see him back out there. So good opportunity for Alvin Kamara, could potentially be on the way. So he's one to keep watching. Bub Means, the rookie wide receiver drafted in the 5th round out of Pittsburgh. His season is officially over. According to the NFL transaction wire, his practice window has closed. So he was on injured reserve with an ankle injury. Tried to come back. They opened up that 21-day practice window for him. When they opened up that 21-day practice window, he got 21 practice days to get back out on the field for the New Orleans Saints. And if he wasn't able to do that, wasn't able to get back to the active roster, then he would have to revert to injured reserve and his season would officially be over. That is the case for Bub Means. They brought him back a couple weeks ago. I think it was the week before the Giants game, forgive me, but I'm fairly certain that's right. And during that week, he had a setback and he has not been able to get back out on the field. And I'll tell you, man, there is just no New Orleans Saint. There's no football player that I've met that has a better attitude than Bub Means. Dude has an attitude of gold, a smile that lights up a room, all that good stuff. This dude is just jovial, loves his life, loves the game of football. He will be pushing to be back as quickly as possible over the course of the offseason so that he can kind of show a little bit of a bounce back year in his second year. So a big name to watch over the course of the offseason. Speaking of wide receivers, Chris Olave has been elevated to practicing in full over the course of the past couple of days. Now, here's where it's a little tricky, all right? On Wednesday, Christmas Day, that was an estimated injury report. He was estimated as being full, although they didn't actually practice. Then they crammed some Wednesday and Thursday together the day after Christmas yesterday. During that day, they were actually on the field. He was listed as a full participant in practice. But remember, it was a lot of walkthrough. Wasn't as much tempo, wasn't as much, simulation of the actual game of football. So today will be pretty telling when it comes to Chris Olave. I would not expect him to play this weekend. That would be very, very surprising for me, although not impossible. Very surprising for me and from what I've heard. But that game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Tampa, if he could potentially make his way back out onto the field, I think he'd love to kind of cap off this season and finish off this season on the field with his teammates, getting him ready for the offseason and then getting him ready for his bounce back in 2025. But even if he doesn't make it back this year, great news for Chris Olave, whose future had a lot of questions lingering after that scary hit week 9 up against the Carolina Panthers, just 2 weeks after another scary hit that ended up being 2 confirmed concussions, was checked for another concussion during the Chargers in between those 2 games as well. Great news for Chris Olave for his future. So there's a chance you see Alvin Kamara, a very slim chance that you see Chris Olave, a very, very slim chance that you see Derek Carr, but no Erik McCoy expected, no Lucas Patrick expected, and certainly no Bub Means for the rest of the season. So that's your injury update for the New Orleans Saints as they go up against the Raiders, who are going to be looking to make things tough, very likely, for a young quarterback in Spencer Rattler, who's 0-4 in his starts. But him being 0-4 in his starts, the Saints continue to turn back to him, which I think tells us that the Saints don't feel that they have gotten a full and reliable evaluation of their young potential future star quarterback in Spencer Rattler. I'll tell you why next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends over at Game Time, the absolute best place to go and buy your tickets for your favorite events. whether you're buying them months in advance or moments in advance. It's my favorite place to go when I want to buy a ticket to an event that I want to go to like tonight, because as you get closer and closer to the event, sometimes tickets get even more affordable over on Game Time. They believe in that so much that they have their Game Time guarantee. Let's say you buy a ticket to an event on Game Time. If you go to a different ticketing site and find a cheaper option in the same section and same row, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. That's how confident they are in their deals. I'm confident in their deals too. It's why I always go to Game Time when I'm buying tickets for my favorite events, and it makes it even easier with Game Time picks, as well as the ability to see views from your seats, all in pricing, which you can toggle on, so there are no fees that take you by surprise by the time you get to checkout. Go and check them out today. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. That's promo code LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. That's over at Game Time. What time is it? Game Time. All right, family. I think the New Orleans Saints aren't hiding anything anymore when it comes to the young quarterback situation or the young quarterback conversation within their facility. They're not hiding it anymore. The New Orleans Saints do not feel that they have gotten a full evaluation of Spencer Rattler because they are aware of what they have been able to put around him so far in his 4 starts and what's about to be his 5th start. They're telling you everything that they believe about Spencer Rattler by continuing to go back to him, and I think it's the right choice. Let me explain to you why I think that the New Orleans Saints, and here's what I'll say. If the New Orleans Saints truly feel that they haven't gotten a full evaluation or a reliable evaluation on Spencer Rattler, it makes perfect sense to continue to go back to him. That, I think, is the right choice if they're in that situation. If they're in one to where they felt like, well, this guy, we have no belief in him, we have no hope for him, stuff like that, but we'll keep putting him out there, then I think you're doing him a disservice, right? But clearly, the Saints feel like he has the potential to be something greater than what he has been able to show in his 4 starts, 4.5 games. Certainly, I believe that as well. So let's take a look at why it is that the New Orleans Saints have continued to say and show everyone that they feel that they have an incomplete evaluation on Spencer Rattler. And by the way, I'll tell you, I agree that they have an incomplete evaluation. Here are some of the reasons why. In the last game against the Green Bay Packers, Spencer Rattler was under pressure 52.6% of the time and had his starting center for only 7 total snaps in that game. The New Orleans Saints have continued to put teams around him, not because they want to, but because they've had to, that are injured, beat up, and don't have the starter caliber talent that you'd like to be putting around a rookie quarterback. It's one thing to put an injured team around a 10-year vet. It's an entirely different thing to put an injured team around a rookie quarterback. And the Saints are showing you that they think that too. Let's look at some of the players that have been unavailable in Spencer Rattler's 4 starts so far. Let's start with center Erik McCoy. I'm saying he was unavailable all 4 games, because he wasn't there against Tampa, wasn't available during the Denver Broncos game, wasn't available against the Los Angeles Chargers, and then was only available for 7 snaps up against the Green Bay Packers this past week. So 4 games without Erik McCoy, 3 games without both Taysom Hill and Rashid Shaheed, 2 games without Chris Olave, 2 games without Cesar Ruiz, and a game without Alvin Kamara last week, and a game without his starting left guard in Lucas Patrick as well. And going into this upcoming game, of those players, he will not have Erik McCoy. He will not have Chris Olave, more than likely. He will not have Rashid Shaheed, Taysom Hill, Lucas Patrick, and probably won't have Alvin Kamara either. So does it get any better for him going up against the Raiders? No, not necessarily in terms of the talent that's around him. However, it is going to be a little bit more of an evenly matched matchup because the Las Vegas Raiders are not the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They are not the Los Angeles Chargers. They are not the Denver Broncos, and they are not the Green Bay Packers. All 4 of those teams have been playoff teams, or are going to be playoff teams, let's say it that way, because the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are likely to win the NFC South because the Falcons are pretty atrocious. So when we look at all that, it makes sense why the New Orleans Saints would say, well, don't really have a full evaluation. So let's look at one other thing, right? We mentioned that they were having trouble keeping pressure off of him last week. Some of that's on him, and he owned up to that during his media availability at the end of the game, talking about like, that's on me, all those other things. Kind of the thing you're supposed to do as a quarterback is accept the accountability. But if you listen to Shane Lemieux's conference call with us, which you can find over on the New Orleans Saints YouTube page, he spoke a lot about him missing some of those ID calls, the offensive line dealing with some issues when it came to fundamentals and technique and things like that, which has been the story of the New Orleans Saints offensive line, whether it's Spencer Rattler, whether it's Derek Carr, whether it's Jake Haener. all starting as well. But let's look at the production under pressure, because I can show you exactly where you can see why the New Orleans Saints like Spencer Rattler and where Spencer Rattler still has room to grow. And obviously, any quarterback in their rookie year has room to grow. So here's a couple of numbers. Against pressure, Derek Carr, 31.3% of the time of his dropbacks in his 10 starts, he faced pressure. Spencer Rattler, 39.3% of the time. So pretty close, about an 8% or exactly an 8% difference there. 10 starts for Derek Carr and 5 starts now, or 5 games rather, for Spencer Rattler. And so when you have a 10-year vet and a rookie, those are pretty similar numbers. And of course, defenses are going to send more pressure knowing that they're going up against a young quarterback. So let's look at the completion percentages. 48.8% for Derek Carr under pressure, 45.7% for Spencer Rattler. Not far off. That's about a 3% deficit there between the two. They both average 6.2 yards per attempt in the passing game while under pressure. Derek Carr, 4 touchdowns under pressure. Spencer Rattler, no touchdowns under pressure, but Derek Carr, 3 interceptions under pressure. Spencer Rattler, 1 interception under pressure, which I believe was the one that he threw in this past game against Green Bay. But now here's where the difference is, all right? So those are things that you could look at. You could say, oh, well, Spencer Rattler's just as good or right about as good, right? Just a little bit less than where Derek Carr is. But Derek Carr's got 10 years of experience and Spencer Rattler's a rookie. He's not doing that bad, which is true. He's not doing that bad, especially under pressure. Those are good numbers for a rookie under pressure, especially one that's been under pressure almost 40% of his dropbacks. Now, let's look at where the difference is. Derek Carr under pressure gets the ball out at 3.06 seconds. Spencer Rattler, 3.46 seconds. So holding onto the ball a little bit long. You heard Darren Rizzi in his conference call with us on Tuesday talk about that. Like one of the sacks that he took, held on the ball a little bit long, got to get it out a little bit faster. Referenced Jordan Love in the same game, took a snap, was able to see that what he wanted wasn't there, so he just dirted the ball at the receiver's feet. I got a number for you on that as well. You look at throwaway passes so far for both of these quarterbacks. Derek Carr, under pressure, has thrown away 13 passes. Spencer Rattler has thrown away only 5 passes. So that's going to be a big part of his game, is just get the ball out, throw it away, don't take the sack, right? And that's something that you'll continue to see, that they want to continue to see Spencer Rattler get better at. Here's the other thing. Pressure to sack percentage, all right? So this is the percentage of pressures that actually result in a sack, all right? 8.5% for Derek Carr. That's a really good number, by the way. It's an extremely good number. That means he's getting the ball out, even when he's under pressure. He's getting the ball out quicker than he did last year. He's making better decisions with the football, like throwing it away as opposed to taking the sack, things like that. Well, Spencer Rattler, 24.3% of his pressures have been converted into sacks. That's why the sack number disparity is so large between these two quarterbacks. 8 sacks so far for Derek Carr, 17 sacks so far for Spencer Rattler, 17 taken, including 3 last week against the Green Bay Packers. So that's just going to be a part of it. Feeling things out, getting the ball out, throwing it away, all those other things. Last thing, big time throws under pressure, 7, according to Pro Football Focus for Derek Carr, 3 for Spencer Rattler. So not just getting the ball out, but making some of those big time throws. Think back to that throw, the 39-yard completion from Spencer Rattler to Marquez Valdes-Scantling down the field up against the Washington Commanders in that second half, right? That opening drive in the second half. Perfect example of that. The jump pass against Green Bay where he connected with, I believe it was Foster Moreau for 20 yards or whatever. Great stuff there. Those are examples of kind of those big time throws while under pressure. More of those and then less of the turnover worthy throws, which, to be honest, not that many under pressure. 5 turnover worthy passes for Spencer Rattler under pressure, 4 for Derek Carr while under pressure. So not a huge split between those two. So I think you can see kind of where the difference is in terms of where Spencer Rattler has the ability or the room, right, between him and where his ceiling is to get much better. And that's going to be managing that pressure a little bit, getting the ball out quicker, and then making some good decisions, even if that decision is to throw the ball away and not take a sack. So very interested to see how he continues to be able to develop that with this upcoming game against the Raiders, who are not a very pressure-heavy team by any means. And by the way, I think that like when you look at the Saints' decision here to do this, it kind of tells you what they think about Jake Haener as well. And it's the same thing that I said when they benched Jake Haener after giving him the start against the Washington Commanders and going to Spencer Rattler. It's very clear to me that the Saints see Spencer Rattler as a starter and they see Jake Haener as a potential long-term backup. And if that's not the way that they see them, they're not doing a very good job of proving that that's not how they see these two quarterbacks. I think it's absolutely how they see them. They won't say it out loud, but they're showing you on the field. Coming up next, let's take a look at the most important matchup for the New Orleans Saints, and that's tight end Brock Bowers. What the New Orleans Saints need to do to stop him, and really, can they? We'll break that all down as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by Hillsdale College. Hillsdale College, democratizing education for you. Maybe there's some things that you learned back in high school, grade school, all that kind of stuff that you've maybe forgotten about that you want to take an endeavor back into learning. Maybe there's some things that you didn't learn about that you're interested in that perhaps Hillsdale offers, where they've got 40 free courses. That's right, free courses that you can find over on their website. It's free to enroll, completely free, easy to sign up, all other stuff. So if you want to check them out, you can dive into stuff like the works of Shakespeare when it comes to the Hamlet, the Tempest, You can dive into logic and mathematics, reasoning, all those other things. Poetry, there's a ton for you to find over at Hillsdale. So you can find them today. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost. It's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu to get enrolled today. Hillsdale.edu/lockedon. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The most important player that the New Orleans Saints defense will need to be focused on in order to keep this game manageable and potentially get a late season win against the Las Vegas Raiders is going to be former Georgia tight end Brock Bowers. Now, drafting a tight end in the first round rarely brings you wins. No matter how good that tight end is, typically doesn't actually impact your win-loss record. I think you can see that with the Las Vegas Raiders. Las Vegas Raiders selected him. I believe it was number 12, is right ahead of the Saints. Might have been 13 then. But right ahead of the Saints. There was a pick right before the New Orleans, actually. Yeah, 13. And so that selection was tight end Brock Bowers. And again, he's performed incredibly well so far this season. It just hasn't shown up on the win-loss column. That's what's to be expected when you draft a tight end in the first round. But man, let me tell you, when it comes down to getting a weapon, they absolutely got that weapon. He leads all tight ends right now in the NFL with 1,067 receiving yards, number 8 in the NFL, regardless of position when it comes to receiving yards as well. So we're talking about a top 10 receiving threat when it comes to yardage, on his way to the Big Easy. And I will tell you that stopping Brock Bowers will be anything but easy for the New Orleans Saints. So let me jump to the first thing that I already know you're thinking of. The New Orleans Saints have struggled to defend tight ends. They've been bad at it, especially early on in the season, all of this stuff. Let me give you some numbers behind that, though, because the Saints have not been as bad against tight ends as you might remember them being. They're not the greatest, but there's more important numbers to defending Brock Bowers that are like in that equation of defending Brock Bowers than his actual position is. So let me dispel something real quick. The Saints right now are in the bottom half of the NFL when it comes to defending tight ends, but they've allowed the 14th most yards to tight ends at just over 800. Not as bad as you might feel. It feels like they should be at least a top 10 team or a bottom 10 team, maybe even a bottom 5 team because of the way that it's talked about. That's the narrative carrying the narrative, right? However, 14th most, not bad at all. In fact, the New Orleans Saints are one of only 2 teams to allow just one single touchdown to tight ends so far this season. They've only given up 1 score to tight ends, and in fact, no team is pitching a shutout. So it's them and the Los Angeles Chargers are the 2 best teams in keeping tight ends out of the end zone. They're the only 2 teams to allow only 1 touchdown to tight ends. So it's not the fact that Brock Bowers is a tight end that's going to give the New Orleans Saints trouble. It's more nuanced than that. It's more finite than that. Let me tell you the number that makes Brock Bowers so dangerous for the New Orleans Saints. And it's not receiving touchdowns. Brock Bowers only has 4 receiving touchdowns on the season. And this is the tight end conundrum. Yeah, go out there and draft a tight end in the first round. He's so good. He's going to catch for a lot of yards and he's going to score some touchdowns, and it's never enough to help you win. Look at Kyle Pitts. Like, you have to get a once in a generation player like a George Kittle in order to have a guy that's going to be able to do that, and see how much that has paid off for San Francisco this year. Here's the number that matters. 564. 564 is the number that matters. according to Next Gen Stats, Brock Bowers leads all tight ends in the NFL with 564 yards after catch. That's the big number to watch. Yards after the catch, 564 for Brock Bowers. The reason why this is so important is because the New Orleans Saints are awful on defense when it comes to limiting yards after catch success. Two numbers to back that up right now. The New Orleans Saints have allowed the second most yards after catch so far this season with 2,056. The only team worse than them is the Jacksonville Jaguars. And if there's a team you want to be associated with when it comes to defense, it ain't the Jacksonville Jaguars. That is without a doubt. On top of that, the New Orleans Saints have surrendered the most yards after catch over expected, plus 476 so far this season, and it's not even close to number 2 on that list. Yards after catch over expected is a down-by-down expectation or a play-by-play expectation that is set of yards after catch. And then how much do you allow above that, or how much do you defend below that? So if it's a positive number, you're allowing more than what's expected. If it's a negative number, you're allowing less than what's expected. And the New Orleans Saints are allowing well over what's expected, 476 yards. So that is where Brock Bowers becomes most dangerous. And it's not just because he's a tight end. It's not just because he's a big body. It's not just because he can make catches over the middle of the field. It's what he can do with the ball in his hands. So even though the New Orleans Saints are at the bottom half of the NFL in terms of yardage allowed to tight ends, but not the worst against tight ends, and are far from the worst against tight ends from a scoring perspective, it's not going to mean much if they're allowing the tight end to get yards after catch. And keep in mind, it's not just Brock Bowers, it's Michael Mayer as well, the former other big first-round pick potential player, right? He had the potential to be a first-round pick out of Notre Dame that the Raiders also selected in the draft. So both of those guys could potentially cause a lot of trouble for the New Orleans Saints, but Brock Bowers in particular with his yards after catch ability, that's where things can get really challenging for New Orleans. The Raiders might be a 3-12 team, that's for sure, but things will get tough if they can't limit Big Brock Bowers in this game. I wanted to also hit here a little bit of lagniappe for you, kind of a best case scenario for the Saints draft potential. All right, the New Orleans Saints are going to go out there, they're going to compete, they're going to try and win that game. Colin Saunders with a very nice message to Saints fans saying that he was going to go out there, and I think somebody had posted something about like, remember weeks 1 and 2 around the New Orleans Saints and how exciting that was. 44 points, 47 points, 96 total points, whatever it was over the course of the first 2 games. I know I got those numbers wrong, but it's okay. But how exciting all of that was over the course of the first 2 games. And Colin Saunders, Bink, I almost said, kind of quote tweeted it and said, got me misty eye, got me crying over here this morning. Like, we're going to do everything that we can to win these last 2 games for Saints fans, best fans in the world, all that. Which is true, best fans in the world. But I think a lot of people also kind of respond to that and they were like, nah, fam, you're good. Well, here's the thing. Even if the New Orleans Saints lose this game, it doesn't really improve their draft that much. Their draft kind of positioning that much. Right now, they're number 10 overall. If the Saints lose this game and Carolina wins, they might get to 9 because they would fall to the bottom of the NFC South if that happens. If Carolina beats Tampa and New Orleans loses to the Raiders, they go to last in the NFC South, just so you know. So that would back them down a little bit. But because they're the only 5-11 team right now, them losing and some other teams winning might not really impact them very much. And them winning at best would put them in maybe an 11th pick situation. So really you're looking at picks 8 through 11 as being where the Saints are probably going to exist by the end of the season, no matter if they win out, no matter if they lose out, whatever it might be. And in this year's draft in particular, ain't that much difference between 8 and 11 at all. Not that much difference between 6 and 11, if we're being honest. And so with this class, the Saints are fine where they're at. They're effectively top 10, even if they get to 11. They're effectively top 10 in this year's class anyway. And so don't worry about it. If the Saints go out there and win, it's not going to tank there. It's not going to move them to the middle of the draft or anything like that. They're pretty well settled in the area where they're going to select in this year's draft. So winning this weekend and winning next weekend, not a bad thing for the New Orleans Saints who definitely want to go out there and get those wins. There is no shot at a top 5 selection for the New Orleans Saints, win out or not. All right. We appreciate you very much, as always, for being here for another episode. I'm going to start my drive back to New Orleans now, get back home, and we're going to have another episode for you over the course of the weekend, getting you ready. And then, of course, we'll be live after the game following that Saints and Raiders matchup, win or lose. We thank you very much for making us your first listen. Make sure you check out Locked On NFL for your second listen today. And we thank you, whether it's your first time or your next time, for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.